Steve, at the end of the last unit, we were talking about the importance of the Redeemer imagery for 2nd Isaiah, and I was saying that the Redeemer language ultimately is family language, and it seems to be making the point that the community of the 2nd Isaiah thinks of itself as family, and all subsequent interpreters within that tradition, all the way down through and beyond the Christian interpretations of this material, are also to think of themselves somehow as family. Beginning in chapter 49, though, we've got even more of these family references, some of which use the redemption language and others don't. How does this expansion of the notion of family work in this particular part of the 2nd Isaiah?
Yeah, it really is fascinating. This language of Redeemer, Goel in Hebrew, is very powerful. Here you've got these people in Babylonian exile suffering horribly, worried that perhaps the Davidic kingship has been decimated, the covenant's been broken. What do they do? The type of marriage that a husband, Redeemer, say, has to a wife, that he would be obligated to come and rescue her from whatever debt or slavery she got bound up into, that's a ongoing, permanent, eternal commitment of the husband to the wife. It's bound up in these family ties, which you're really not supposed to sever. So to picture God as a committed husband, Redeemer, is to speak of the type of covenant that God had with Abraham. That's eternal. It's perpetual. God's commitment isn't dependent on Israel's obedience or lack thereof, her sin. It's perpetual.
Which is a very different view than some other biblical views. The book of Deuteronomy and also the book of Jeremiah do talk about a divorce that takes place between God and Israel, and the relationship cannot be reestablished after that for legal and cultic reasons. And that becomes an argument for the absolute severing of the relationship between Israel and God. 2nd Isaiah seems to be arguing here exactly the opposite thing.
Well, this notion, I think, is very helpful spiritually. The idea that God is committed to us and that our redemption by God is from God's side, and it's through grace, and we don't have to earn it. We don't have to deserve it. We can completely mess up and fall on our faces, and God is still committed like a husband loving a wife. There's that intimate connection. I think it's rich spiritually. However, the other side of this, when we get into this redemption language, is that this family is highly troubled. The wife of God, the metaphorical lover of God, is Zion, daughter Zion. She's been decimated by the Babylonian destruction of Jerusalem in 586, and her suffering is incomparable. In our section in chapter 51, let's say verse 18, God admits there's no one to guide this woman among all the children she's born. There's no one to take her by the hand. Who can even mourn for a person who's been so devastated by destruction, famine, and sword? It's healing, I think, just for God to come out and to admit that she has suffered way beyond anything anyone could ever deserve. And I think it's spiritually interesting for us when God admits that some of the tragedy in our human experience is way beyond anything that even God can put up with in God's mind. Extremely interesting. But there is this family language. There's God as the redeeming husband, Zion as the wife, and also her children.
But the denial that an actual divorce has taken place, and raises the question again of whether or not the redemption of Israel, the redemption of the community, the redemption of Zion, is going to take place through the use of human agents at all. We've spent a lot of time working with this idea of human agents that seem to pop up all over 2nd Isaiah. And do you think it is simply the case that at the end of the day, this all has to be some kind of a divine act, or are people finally involved in this? I mean, what do you make of this repetition still of the servant language in these chapters? Does the servant really have a role? Is there any sense in which the community or the city are responsible for their own redemption? Or does this all have to be an outright divine act? What is 2nd Isaiah's view on all this?
Well, I think this is something really worth pondering. You've got this family, God, Zion. Where does this mysterious figure of the servant that we've alluded to, where does the servant figure fit in? And is Israel in any way involved in its own redemption? I mean, for me, you can feel free to disagree, Bob, but I think it's interesting that the wife of God, daughter Zion, bears these miracle children. If you look in chapter 49, around verses 18, 19, 20, 21, Zion puts on beauty like a bride, and all of a sudden her children are gathering to her. The children of whom you were bereaved are now so many that the place is too crowded for them. Sort of this miracle blossoming of the remnant on Mount Zion. Where did they come from? It's a miracle. There's no way, just like Abraham and Sarah had a miracle children, there's no way it could happen without God doing it. But are they in some way related to the servant? Are they the folks who have taken up this new lifestyle of reverence, of humility and frailty, and are running with it? Is that the way that human beings participate in this redemption? By emulating the servant, by being children of the servant?
So this also may hark back to the beginning of these images of calling the community to return, all the way back in chapter 40, where again the notion of too much suffering on the part of Jerusalem was also raised there. All these themes now seem to be coming back in this language about the restoration of the family, as well as some major confusion about roles and who does what, which seems to be characteristic of the 2nd Isaiah material. And the answer to who the agent of redemption actually is, one wonders whether or not this might be both of these things.
Well, I think many times in Christianity there's an emphasis on the individual spiritual relationship with God. But 2nd Isaiah will not let you keep it just at that. The whole notion of a redeemer, as you say, involves the creation of an entire community that is involved in this lifestyle, this spirituality, this virtue of reverence before this awesome, towering God of otherness, this inscrutable deity. It's not an individual phenomenon. It's a new lifestyle that should spread and infect the world and really change politics and economics and hard reality. Does the servant have children? Are there progeny? I think we'll see in the next section that he does. When we get to chapter 53, verse 10, God is putting him through this, and if he's willing to bear up faithfully, he will see offspring. He'll see progeny. He'll see seed. So at least by the end of this corpus of 2nd Isaiah, you're beginning to get these promises of a new breed of growth, messianic seed or posterity that's just emulating the servant lifestyle and spreading it like peanut butter.
So the relationships between the individual servant and the communal responsibility of the people as servant are related to each other in some way that is never quite clear, but as we proceed in this material, it seems to be the case that the individual redeemer, the servant, is going to be a model of some sort for the community. And this sounds an awful lot like the way that people begin to understand Jesus in the Gospels, that Jesus is in some way a model for how the community is supposed to act.
You can't just say Jesus died on the cross, accomplished salvation, whew, thank goodness we're done.
Not according to the Gospel of Mark and some other places where it's pretty clear that Jesus is simply the example of what the community is responsible
It's
to
the
do.
germ of something spreading with energy and
It is,
expansion.
and that the community somehow cannot get off the hook. You cannot have redemption individually done to you.
Right.
You really have to participate in it in a corporate way, and you have some responsibility to bring redemption to the remainder of the community.
I think that's going to be offensive. I mean, a lot of Christians want Jesus to be completely different and unique in accomplishing redemption. We can't be Jesus.
No, but certainly the second Isaiah, and I would argue also with the Gospel of Mark and elsewhere, where the community of disciples has an imitative role to play in this process of salvation. And you got it all the way again back in chapter 40. You got the community benefiting from God's leading them back to Zion, but then they become the agents of God's redemption once they get back there, and they proceed then to redeem all of the cities of Judah. So in the next unit, we're going to look at more carefully at these individual figures, and particularly what is probably the most unusual of the servant poems.